Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of High Energy Girl. And today's awesome guest is Dr. Marc Milstein, who wrote The Age-Proof Brain, New Strategies to Improve Memory, Protect Immunity, and Fight Off Dementia. And since my mom has dementia, this episode is very important for me. So let's go and say hello to Dr. Milstein. Hey everyone, welcome to High Energy Girl, a podcast helping women to age stronger because it is never too late to get fit, be strong, and feel sexy. I'm your host, Tracy Gluhige, health coach and personal trainer and founder of highenergygirl.com. Each week, we will either have a guest interview, which will provide you encouragement or an actionable tip to help you age stronger, or I will do a solo episode. Please also join our awesome Facebook group called High Energy Girls, and I'm looking forward to see you on the inside of that group and hope you enjoy today's show. Guess what, everyone? My book is out. It is a revised and updated edition of a book I wrote 5 years ago called No Frickin' Way, 21 Days to Ditch the Diet and Lose Weight the Keto Way by Loving Yourself to Health. When I first wrote the original book, I was not a believer in the low-carb movement, but after all the years of research I've done, I am sold out for life. In this book, you will learn about all the lies you have been fed, how to engage in loving self-care, how to eat nourishing foods that provide massive energy, why the ketogenic diet is not a fad, how to heal your body through fasting, why you should move your body to get stronger, and how to create an empowering mindset. Start reading now and finally achieve the high energy and positive body image you deserve. Check it out on Kindle, on Amazon. And if you like it, please leave us a review because this will help more people find it. I really want to inspire people to not deprive themselves, but to nourish themselves with loving self-care and amazingly healthy food so that they can age stronger. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed writing it. Hey, Marc, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So for the listeners that don't know who you are yet, can you please tell them a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have a book that just came out called The Age-Proof Brain, and it is about the little things that we can do to get the best of our brain each day, and also protect our brain years down the road. And so my training is as a scientist. I got a doctorate from UCLA in biological chemistry. I've done a lot of research, and really what I focus on is taking the latest studies and breaking them down in a way where making them usable so that we can get really take-home tips from them, and trying to separate out the noise and the studies that aren't so great from the ones that are good, because we have all these hopeful insights now that there are things that we can do really to protect our brain, lower risk for dementia, Alzheimer's, anywhere from 30 to 60%. And those same things also can really boost your brain health day to day.
Cool. Well, I'm very interested in all of that. But how did you get there? Like, why the brain?
So I actually started at UCLA in breast cancer research, and I was part of a group of researchers that was studying a protein involved in breast cancer, and that same protein was also discovered to be involved in learning and memory. And at the time, that was an interesting insight that something involved in one part of the body had one function, and then in a different part of the body did something completely different. And so it was just about the time that our understanding of the brain was really evolving and sort of exploding in terms of really learning about how the brain worked in ways that made us optimize aspects of our life. So for example, how to sleep better, how to manage stress, the gut-brain connection. And it was just really it still is, but at the time it was a really exciting time to get all these insights and to realize that these insights actually had practical applications.
Cool. So how long have you been doing all this?
Well, I guess that's a good, 15 years, 20 years. Yeah, quite a long
time.
Yeah.
Nice. So what do you feel like is the single most interesting factor that you have found out? Like, what was just like oh my gosh, everybody needs to know this?
Well, I think it started for me personally with sleep because I'm not a good sleeper by nature. And so the understandings of what's happening when we're sleeping, how important it is, and how to optimize it, I think it all really started there. And then starting to understand that it's all connected, that if you want to optimize your sleep, you have to think about your stress and what you're eating, and then realizing that these what's happening when you're sleeping isn't just helping you feel good the next day, but it's impacting your brain health, decades from now. And so that this understanding that it's not just about like doing a crossword puzzle for your brain, but all these little things that add up to make a significant difference.
So what did you apply based on all your research to help yourself sleep better?
Yeah, definitely. One of the first things was something actually won the Nobel Prize. It was this understanding that in your brain there's this clock that every single day counts down to when you're going to fall asleep at night. And the countdown timer starts by getting outside in the morning. And so, we can think about sleep as something that we prepare for, like, half hour before bed or 5 minutes before bed. But this understanding that it's actually, we're preparing for sleep in the morning, like soon after we get up, we're already starting the process to fall asleep that night. And in our times, modern times, I should say, it's so easy to not get outside. You can easily start work or jump in a car or commute somewhere, or stay home, or work from home, or whatever you're doing at home, and we can miss out on really a simple actionable thing that we can do, which is get outside for about 10 minutes, which starts the countdown process, which helps us sleep at night. So I would say starting there with something, realizing it wasn't necessarily intuitive, but it makes sense once you understand it, and really can be quite impactful.
So does it have to be light out? Like, what if you wake up and it's still dark?
It's okay to wake up before the sun comes up, as long as you're getting enough sleep. But when the sun does come up, it's to help optimize sleep. It's a good idea to get outside, take a quick walk, get some fresh air, and get that mechanism going in the brain that starts the countdown process. Because just an example of how this is all connected, not to go off on a tangent, but that what's so fascinating is that the brain clock that counts down doesn't just regulate your sleep; it also plays a role in mood, metabolism, weight gain, weight loss. So it's like a master regulator. So it's another example of something that is just very much interconnected, and that's why this is also interesting, that it's not just one thing. It's like it's all these things sort of interconnect, and it gives us avenues to optimize brain health.
Okay, so what I'm taking is healthy habit number 1, go outside for 10 minutes and take a little walk once there's light out. Yeah.
Yes, yes, very, yeah. That's a great first thing to do for many aspects of brain health.
Okay, cool. I like it. And does it matter if it's cloudy?
No, it doesn't matter if it's cloudy. It's the wavelength of light, and so it doesn't matter if it's a cloudy day. And understandably, certain times of the year it's freezing out. So if you can't get outside and you can get at least near a window, that can be helpful too.
Okay, cool. Love it. So then what else? Like, what is a way for us to just like optimize our brain so that we are on point during our workday?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question, because in the world that we live in, or especially in our society, goes against a lot of the things that make our brain function optimally. And one of the things is just the constant distractions, multitasking. And there's nothing wrong with multitasking from time to time. It can be helpful, it can be useful. But what we see is that there really needs to be times in the day where we do nothing but focus on a singular task, and then times during the day where we take a complete break. And it sounds so simple and so obvious, but if we just think about what happens during the day, a lot of the time we're kind of juggling more than one thing. So we might say, "Oh, I'm going to take a break, but I'm going to answer some work emails while I'm taking that break. I'm going to go for a walk, but I'm going to, do some texting that I need to do for work. Or while we're working, we're also, checking the score or checking a travel website, or, we're doing multiple things at once." And there's all these studies that show that to lessen the risk of burnout and to increase focus and productivity is just literally setting a timer and being like, I'm going to just do the work I have to get done for this amount of time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, then take a complete break, like actually get outside, go for a walk, listen to music, but have that boundary that is all focus or work and then all relaxation and then go back to work, as opposed to sort of spending the day just sort of multitasking and doing 2 to 3 things at the same time.
Now, I've heard it said that it's impossible for the brain to focus on more than one thing at a time. What do you feel about that?
Well, the brain is amazing in the sense that it can do it, but it doesn't do it very well. So it's like, if you've ever had that experience where someone's talking to you and they're like looking at their phone and you're like, "Are you listening?" They're like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm listening," and they think they might be listening, but they're not really listening. And so that's just an example where we can convince ourselves, if we're on the other side of that and we're the ones going, "Yeah, yeah, I'm listening." That we can get by, but we notice if we're the ones talking and hoping that somebody's listening to us, they're not really getting the information that we need them to get.
Right. They're hearing that you're saying something, but they're not
Right.
sure what, because their
Right.
phone is more important.
Right. Right.
That is funny. And then as far as like the whole, you said something at the beginning about preventing
Yes.
accelerated, diseases of the brain. What lifestyle practices besides improving sleep have you found to be effective?
Yeah, so there's the book covers 11 of them, and we have all this data now that optimizing sleep, thinking about things that we're eating, stress management, underlying conditions that we wouldn't think are connected, but they're really connected. What's happening in our gut, being social, learning new things. That's just an example of some of them, but it's very empowering and hopeful that these things can really lessen the risk. And that's what we're talking about, is how do we lower risk of memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's. And we clearly see that can take place by following some of these lifestyle factors.
Well, we talked a little bit before about my mom and her accelerated memory loss or whatever she's going through. And when I first found out, I started doing some nutritional research and I found the ketogenic diet and tried to put her on that to help herself. And she did it for a while and was feeling better, but then gradually the sugar vampire took back control of her body and she started eating lots of sugar again. So what do you find to be an effective way to prevent these diseases of the brain on the nutrition end of things?
Yeah, yeah. Where we have the most evidence is Mediterranean mind-like diets, and so there's something called the Mind Diet, and it's a cross between the Mediterranean diet and the Heart Healthy Dash diet. And when people follow this diet, they lower their risk of Alzheimer's, dementia, memory loss by about 35% if they sort of follow the diet. And if they strictly follow the diet, they lower the risk by about 53%. And it's much easier to follow than a lot of other diets. It's not the only diet, so there's definitely other choices. There's definitely options, but where we have the most evidence is these Mediterranean mind-like diets, and they basically consist of whole natural foods most of the time, limiting the processed ingredients, the added sugar that you mentioned, and trying to stick to, vegetables, fiber, lean meat, olive oil, Mediterranean-like foods, and then really trying to minimize the ultra-processed foods, the ones that have, you look at the ingredients and you're like, what, like, I can't pronounce this stuff. It's just like a chemistry experiment. I don't know what's going on here. Just really minimizing those things because they can cause inflammation in the gut that can spread to the brain. And that's what we're concerned about. So, in all the complexity of diet, a big step forward in something that is simple and actionable is like just looking at your plate, thinking, is this stuff here going to spoil someday? Like, is it something that's not loaded with the additives and the preservatives? That's a good sign. Is it colorful fruits and vegetables? Most of the plate, that's a good sign. There's definitely leeway within there, but that's a big step that people can take. That's pretty simple.
The whole foods, local, seasonal.
Yeah.
Really good. The Mediterranean diet is great. I pretty much follow Mediterranean just without any starch,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I feel amazing.
That's
And
great.
what other takeaway tips do you feel like people respond well to that you can share today?
Yeah, I think that one of the simplest, most impactful tips is walking. So there's evidence that people who walk about 30 minutes a day, doesn't have to all be done at the same time, lower their risk of memory loss by about 60%. And
Mm.
we have all this really interesting data now that backs up why we see this correlation. And basically, when we walk, we release a chemical in our brain called BDNF. It just basically keeps our brain cells healthy, keeps them basically youthful. And the idea is that we realize that any exercise is good, but just thinking about making sure you're getting about 30 minutes of walking in a day. So like parking a little bit farther from the grocery store, even walking around your house or apartment, it all adds up. And within that 30 minutes, if you can make about 10 minutes of it, 6 to 10 minutes of it, a little bit of a brisker walk, a little bit more intensity. A lot of studies are showing that getting the heart rate up for even that little burst of time within the day improves memory. So again, I'm always thinking about what are the simplest things that we can do, because it's hard to make major changes. So what are things that we can incorporate? Like, oh, I'm going to go for a walk with a friend. I'm going to park a little farther from the grocery store. I'm going to get off stop earlier on the bus or the subway or something like that. All those things can add up and be helpful for brain health.
So are you saying a cumulative of 30 minutes
Yeah,
instead of just
cumulative.
one stint of 30
Yeah, it
minutes?
doesn't have to be. That's what's interesting. It didn't have to all be done at the same time.
Oh, interesting. I always tell my clients to go out for a walk for 30 minutes a day, unplug,
Yeah,
just go and connect.
yeah,
Like my new favorite thing is just listening for birds
yes,
and nothing else. My focus on anything auditory, or then sometimes I'll go and then what do I notice with my eyes? Like the flowers, the grass, and have gratitude for everything
yes.
that's out there, you know?
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's exactly like some of the things that we see are what you're talking about. There's a lot of science to back up. Being in nature for like 10 minutes lowers stress levels, cortisol levels, um, mindfulness, being in the present moment, focusing on what you said, the sound of the birds, the feel of the earth at your feet. All these things have real brain health benefits because it's a momentary time away from all the stresses. As you said, the unplugging, which is so important.
Oh yeah, I used to take walks, but I'd be plugged in and tuned into a podcast.
Right, right,
Not mine, but just to learn. But
right.
then I realized how much more in my heart I am if I'm just tuned into nature.
Yeah, yeah. Nature is very, very nurturing and very, very impactful for brain health. It's one of those things that just like study after study keeps highlighting how important it is.
So earlier you mentioned the gut brain connection. Can you
Yeah.
explain that if people aren't aware?
Yeah, it's really an exciting avenue. It's definitely emerging, so we want to be careful not to be careful that there's definitely some marketing that overstates what we know scientifically in terms of selling products. But the essence of what we're excited about is that what's happening in your gut impacts what's happening in your brain, and what's happening in your brain impacts what's happening in your gut. And just one example of this is, well, everything from basically your mood to aspects of anxiety, depression. They can be related to what's happening in your gut. What's happening in your gut can play a role. And just to put this in perspective, just an element of kind of how to visualize it is that one of the things we want to think about, and what I talk about a lot in the book, is basically keeping your brain clean. And I know that might sound odd, but as we get older, the brain basically fills up with waste, garbage, trash that can interfere with our brain cells' ability to function. And that process gets less efficient as we get older. So we want to do things that can make our brain more effective at removing that waste so that our brain cells can function at optimal levels. And one of the ways that we get rid of trash and waste is we have these amazing human cells that swim around and they gobble up the trash, kind of like a bottom feeder at the bottom of an aquarium. Those little fish that gobble up the garbage. We have something just like that in your brain that gobbles up the garbage, but they can get confused. And instead of eating the garbage, they attack healthy brain cells. And that can really devastate memory, raise the risk for depression, anxiety, because these cells are turning on and attacking the brain. And essentially how this relates to the gut is that they're called microglia, and these microglia are immune cells. And if there's inflammation in the gut, it can leave the gut, get into the bloodstream, make its way to the brain, and confuse the microglia into not doing their job correctly. And they start attacking healthy brain cells instead of just eating up the garbage and waste. So it's just one example of many of how what's happening down in our gut can be sending signals to our brain to either function properly or make these mistakes and start attacking our own brain cells. So it's kind of like an autoimmune response that is happening in the brain. And we can imagine that if our immune system's attacking our brain, how much damage that can do.
So how do you counter that?
A big part is what we're eating. So that goes back to the sugars that you mentioned, the added sugars. It's, if sugar is naturally occurring in food, not as big of a concern. But if it's added sugar or it's the processed ingredients, those cause a growth of bad bacteria in the gut that can release factors that get into the bloodstream, make their way to the brain, and confuse the microglia. And then the whole natural foods, the fibers, the vegetables, all the things that we were talking about, they actually lessen inflammation in the gut, and they can help basically send signals to the brain to function, so the microglia function properly. So we realize that, when people say, "Oh, does what I eat really impact my brain?" But now we see that this really does make a difference, because it's sending signals through the blood to impact these cells that are either cleaning up or attacking our brain.
Interesting. And once, so say somebody's been living for decades with, doing damage, say they're in their 70s and they've been eating garbage for a very long time, for decades, are they able to reverse any of the damage?
Yeah, so we do, it definitely depends on the individual. And one hopeful aspect of this is that we don't believe it's one thing. We believe it's the combination. It's like the straw that breaks the camel's back. So, if somebody's listening to this and like, "Oh no, I'm having trouble sleeping," or I've done this, it's not just one thing. It's in almost all cases, it's the accumulation of all these factors, or combination of these factors for certain individuals, plus genetics. Genetics, we can talk about, are not everything, but they play a role. And that is also hopeful, that it's not everything. Genes are not everything in almost all cases when it comes to specific conditions for brain health. But the idea is that we do have evidence that when people, in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, change their lifestyle factors, have like an integrative approach, they have basically like an intervention. There's these really fascinating studies where when they do these things that we're talking about, their brain, like how fast their brain works, goes up like 150%. Like how they run their day goes up 83% improved. So we see that we believe that there is this hope that we can make these changes and we can see impacts. And even if we've had things earlier in life where we've said, "Oh, that wasn't ideal," we can still improve.
Nice. And the crosswords, where do those fit in?
So the crossword puzzles fit in a way where they can be fun and they can be beneficial. If you like doing them, keep doing them, but they're not the only thing that matters. They're a small piece of the puzzle, not to use a pun, but they're like not everything. And so this idea that, "Oh, I'm just going to do crossword puzzles and then that'll be fine," we really want to get away from that, or the idea of, I'm not doing them and then I'm not doing enough for my brain. Learning new things is really important, but learning new things doesn't have to be a crossword puzzle. So it can be, learning something from a podcast. You could take a course, just meeting with friends, being social. That's learning, and also learning through movement. So I like to say cross-train your brain and think about how you can, if you went to the gym, you wouldn't just like work out your biceps every time. That would eventually not look right. So the same thing with your brain. You want to think about working out different parts of your brain. And that is by doing different types of activities that work out different parts of your brain. And just being social is one of those important activities.
I'm so glad you said that, because with COVID and the ridiculous things that our seniors in our country and around the world had to deal with, my parents they live in like a senior, I don't know what you call it, a senior living center place. Mm-hmm. And they used to enjoy having meals with friends. And then with COVID, they were stuck in their room. And my mom's brain deteriorated so much that I'd call her on the phone because that's all I could do. And she thought she was living wherever the TV was. So one day I'd say, "What are you doing, Mom?" She's like, "Oh, we're at the golf course." I'm like, "Oh, really?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's a beautiful day and la, la, la." And she wasn't. Golf was just on the television.
Oh, yeah, that's sad. Very sad.
It's so
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah.
So my point with that is the social interaction is so important. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, is even older and she lives on her own, but she still continued to do the things she wanted to do and didn't let it interfere with her life. And therefore she did not decrease anything. She just still thrived.
Yeah, it's important, especially in these times, to think about feeling connected, not feeling lonely. Loneliness increases the risk of memory loss. Of course, it's normal to feel that from time to time, but too much, too often is a concern. So, anything we can do to feel connected is really important. And it's not, I think, as you mentioned, it's not being talked about enough. We have to prioritize interactions, connections, and it can be through technology, can be in person. There's many ways to do it, but it's important to prioritize it.
Yeah, I think that people aren't aware of it, to be honest, because
Yeah.
I saw studies several years ago that said that the biggest contributors to aging in health were close relationships with family and friends and a strong sense of community.
Yeah.
And I feel like a need to have more senior activities available
Yeah.
in, all of our communities is so important. My mother-in-law is super involved with everything. And so therefore she's going to be 89 and she still drives and
Oh,
does
wow.
whatever she wants to do.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty darn cool. So, I had another thing that you had said a minute ago that I wanted to talk more about, and I lost it. There you go.
That's
See,
okay.
you say something, I think, oh, and I take note.
Yeah.
So what would you say? You talked about genetics. So if genetics are a big play, I'm screwed. Because of my mom and my aunt. But what would you say to do so that you don't turn those genes on?
So, some really hopeful news on this front of genetics is when it comes to Alzheimer's, 95 to 99% of all cases of Alzheimer's, we now say are not strictly genetic. They're not strictly based on genes. Somewhere between 1 to 5% genes play a role in the sense that they're determinant, but those are usually the early cases, early onset cases, very tragic, and we need a lot more research there. But for the 95 to 99% of the population, what we say is that genes can raise or lower risk, but they're not determinant. And in almost all cases, we now know we're not destined to lose our memory. There's these studies that show that even people who have the risk genes that raise the risk of Alzheimer's, when they do these things we've been talking about, they bring that risk back down. So, that's really what the point of this conversation and then the book is about, is what can we do, to leverage, to give ourselves our best odds to lower our risk.
Yes. And what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
Yeah, it's often confused because in the past, those terms were used interchangeably. So it's understandable that it's confusing, but now we're really trying to separate them out and say that dementia is just memory loss. It's not a disease. It's just symptoms of memory loss. And there's many, many things that can cause memory loss. You could have an injury, a hormone imbalance, a vitamin deficiency, many different causes of memory loss. Alzheimer's is one specific disease, a very specific disease that causes memory loss. And it's the most common specific disease that causes dementia or memory loss, but it's not the only one. So we would just say dementia is not a disease, just the symptoms of memory loss. Alzheimer's is one specific disease that causes memory loss.
What other diseases that are like Alzheimer's cause memory loss?
Well, there can be vascular dementia, so issues with the heart can cause, that's one of the more common causes. So that's another thing that we realize is so important, is taking care of our heart. There's other types of dementia that are caused by frontal temporal dementia. Parkinson's in some cases can cause dementia. There can be infections that can cause dementia too, if they do enough damage to the brain. So there's quite a few, but for many of them, we have treatments, not all of them, but many of them we have treatments or things that we can do to lower risk. And it is a major change in our understanding in the research that, just a couple of years ago, the idea of memory loss, we felt like, oh, we don't really know if there's things that we can do, but now we understand that there are things that we can do.
Nice. And from the time that you just started this research and you changed your gear or changed your direction from the breast cancer to this field of study, what habits have you changed in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I quite a few, to be honest. So with sleep, that was a big one, is that really focusing and prioritizing my sleep, because we talked about cleaning the brain. When you go to sleep at night, that's one of the most important times to clean your brain. Your brain actually squeezes out garbage, waste, and trash when you're asleep. Your brain actually shrinks down in your skull when you're sleeping. I know it sounds like a horror movie, but it's actually happening, and it's squeezing out garbage, waste, and then fluid comes up from your spinal cord and washes this trash away. So I think when that breakthrough came, I was like, well, I really need to prioritize my sleep. I need to make sure I'm optimizing this time. And of course, it's never perfect, but that's why I really do try to take that morning walk or that morning light. Then about an hour before bed, I really try to think about, this is the time to start preparing for sleep, as opposed to in the past, what I might have done was just, a minute or two before bed, trying to prepare for sleep, but realizing that the brain needs a transition and trying to put my phone away about a half hour before bed, even getting it out of reach. The light from those devices can impact the ability of the brain to really get into deeper stages of sleep where that brainwash happens. And then something that we're really learning a lot more about, even in the last couple of years, is your environment of your room at night, your bedroom, and really taking an assessment of, are you sleeping in the dark or are you sleeping in like modern dark? There's so many things illuminating our room, and it seems silly or insignificant, but we now know that those little bits of light, even if your eyes are closed, can interfere with your brain's ability to get really restful, deep sleep. So just taking an assessment and unplugging a few things, or trying covering your eyes with, a sleep mask or a clean shirt or something like that, or just, really make sure the curtains are drawn. Just even incrementally saying, I'm going to experiment by making my room a little bit darker. Some people find that it's too dark and I can't wake up. I feel groggy, but just experimenting with saying, I'm going to make my room a little bit darker, because we have all these studies now that show us that our brain truly does get restorative sleep when we're in the dark, as opposed to these little bits of light throughout the room that, again, seem insignificant, but can be disruptive.
Mm-hmm. And another one I don't know if you've thought about is the LED and fluorescent lights that are in a lot of homes that are just such junk light.
Yeah, they can mimic sunlight. They can keep the brain from getting into sleep stages. So being aware of when those lights are on and when they're off, and being aware that the light, it can be very intrusive. The brain and the brain clock are very tuned to light, and how our feeling and our mood and how we're thinking and how we're remembering and also how we're sleeping.
Yeah. I've actually replaced those LEDs with incandescent bulbs, which I find to be a lot more soothing and natural for our bodies.
Yeah. Assessing the light in your environment is important. Coming in your home, also in your home, and within, from the neighbors' lights too, is important too.
Yeah, I use a pink silk sleep mask because my husband comes to bed way later, and he turns on the light and he makes all this noise. So I have earplugs and a sleep mask. Now, I have an Oura ring to measure my sleep. What are you using to measure your sleep, or anything?
I don't use any technology currently to measure my sleep. I've tried those in the past, and they can be very motivating. But what I do now is I just really self-assess. So I just, when I wake up in the morning, I'm very in tune to my sleep in terms of like trying to optimize it. So I'm not looking at data. I'm just more saying, how do I feel? Do I feel like I got a good night's sleep? Do I feel like I feel restored? It's okay to take a nap. I'm not much of a napper, but it's okay to take a nap. But I more just assess, how am I feeling? Do I feel like I got the benefit of my sleep? And are there things I need to do to tweak or optimize to improve it?
Yeah. That's good that you're more intuitive. I happen to just like data. And so I love to see how much oh, that's another question. Is there a difference between the deep sleep and the REM sleep and the light sleep when it comes to having the purging of the bad stuff and re-healing the brain?
Yeah, all those stages are important. We can break it down into a sleep cycle that's about 90 minutes that has those three steps that you mentioned, the light sleep, the deep sleep, and then the REM dreaming stage. When it comes to two phases that we can just quickly talk about, one is deep sleep is where the brainwash happens. It's called the glymphatic system, basically purging and cleaning the waste out of the brain. So deep sleep is really important for that. It's also important for fighting off colds and viruses. It's when your immune system essentially recalibrates itself. And then REM sleep is when you basically strengthen your memory. So anything you learn new during the day, which again is super important. If you think of your brain cells, they make the connection the moment you learn it. But when you're sleeping at night, your brain finds every new connection that you made that day, and it runs electrical stimulation over it while you're dreaming, and it makes that connection stronger. It makes it stick. So if we don't get enough REM sleep, we miss out on making our memory stronger, and that can really impact how much we remember the next day. And also, for example, sleep apnea is one of our biggest risk factors for memory loss, and it's because it's so disruptive that it interferes with REM sleep. And individuals are waking up so many times throughout the night that they're missing out on making those connections stick. That's one of the things that's happening in that condition. On another, hopeful note, is that if people treat sleep apnea, we see the damage done to the brain is reversible. So it's another example where we keep seeing that these things that negatively impact brain health, if we treat them with either lifestyle or some cases, other avenues, they can be highly restored.
Cool.
Yeah.
So do you know what the goal is? Like how much deep sleep is good? How much REM sleep is good?
Yeah, so we think about it in terms of cycles. So if we break it down like this, the average adult, it's between 7 and 9 hours of sleep. And when people hear that, they go, some people are okay with that, and some people are a little bit concerned. So more than 9, we would say check in with your physician, because there could be a reason why you're needing more than 9. It can be okay, but it's a red flag as an adult. Kids and teenagers are different. And then less than 7 can be okay, but it's just really rare. It's a very small segment of the population, and most people in that category are not getting enough sleep. But there are people that do just fine with less than 7. It's just rare. And then when we think about the amounts of deep sleep and REM sleep, something interesting to think about is that REM sleep is when you're dreaming. And when you first start your sleep cycle, you sleep in this 90-minute cycle and you sort of repeat it throughout the night, essentially. And when you first fall asleep, you're only in REM sleep for like about a few minutes, 5, 10, 15 minutes at the most. And then every cycle, you get more and more REM sleep and less deep sleep. So your brain prioritizes the washing first, and then that gets less and less. So it's a dynamic process, is what I'm saying. So what you really want to think about is the cycles. Your brain will take care of itself in terms of the time if you give it enough of these cycles, and that's by shooting for the proper number of hours for that person.
Yeah, I think sleep's underrated. I love it.
Yeah.
So I have another question, totally off topic. But I was talking to somebody last week, and they were talking about how we store memory also in our heart.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been evidenced by people who get a heart transplant.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they become a classical pianist or a martial arts expert because the donor of that heart had those skills. Are you aware of any of that?
Yeah, I talk about that in my book. Aspects of this we don't truly completely understand. It's fascinating, and it highlights the complexity of what we still need to discover. But there are these, I tell a story in my book about somebody who had a heart transplant, and they changed some of their interests. And they were like, all of a sudden they were interested in certain things. They liked certain foods, and they're like, where did this come from? And they found out that the donor had those same interests. So really interesting and fascinating to think about these connections between parts of our body and our brain. Another quick example is like our gut-brain connection. If you love chocolate, for example, if you're a chocolate craver, there's bacteria living in your gut, which some of them are really good, they're very beneficial, and some of them are not so good. But there's certain types of bacteria in the gut that crave chocolate. And they send signals to the brain basically telling your brain, go get me chocolate. I want some chocolate. Because everything you eat goes down in your gut, and the bacteria basically digest it and eat it for you. So it's interesting to think that we're not just our brain, but we are the accumulation of all of our organs, and also things that are living in us and on us that are also impacting. We're kind of an ecosystem.
Oh,
well.
yeah. Absolutely. That's interesting. Yeah. Are you familiar with the company Viome?
Yeah. Where you send in your like a bacterial analysis.
Yeah, you'd send in a stool sample, and then their reports are extremely comprehensive. I mean, like 65 pages. And I don't understand it, but you might. And so I just did a new test because it's been probably about a year, and I wanted to see where I am on stuff. Mm-hmm. But that might also, I don't know if that would help you guys with what you're working on, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's an emerging area. There's it's hard to that's an area to keep our eye on, but that's also an area where we don't have strong like conclusions. It's more like it's interesting, and it's still being worked out, because the gut bacteria is so complex, and two people can have very different combinations of gut bacteria and still be very healthy. And so we're still trying to tease out what are those signatures, what are those combinations of gut bacteria that are optimal, because they can be so different in two people who have healthy microbiomes. It's not as simple as we thought, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, well, it's just the same as somebody could thrive on a vegan diet and another person thrives on carnivore,
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's those of us who don't like to have so many restrictions and more omnivore. So, but everybody thrives differently. So that might be kind of similar with the gut microbiome. So, Marc, where can people find your book?
It's everywhere books are sold, as they say. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, local bookstores. So it's out and it's there, and it's a deeper dive into things we've been talking about, and it's in a style where you can have a science background, you have no science background, but if you're interested in this topic, it's filled with lots of take-home tips and written in a way where it doesn't feel like a boring science class.
Oh, good. So it's engaging.
Yeah.
And it's called The Age-Proof Brain?
Yes.
Okay. And what about on social? Are you anywhere? Where do you want people to find you?
I'm just starting to do more things on social media. So just at Dr. then my name, Marc Milstein. So at Dr. Milstein, Instagram, and some Facebook, other places like that, LinkedIn, just, starting to put out little tips here and there, updates, new studies, fun little take home tips of things that we can do based upon, how to optimize your sleep or your stress or memory. So that's a place to follow, to find me too.
And you also have a website with the same name?
Yeah.
Dr. Marc Milstein.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, thanks. Great talking to you. I really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate it.
And I really appreciate that you gave the listeners so many tips that they can just begin right now.
Oh, good. Yeah. It's all about take-home tips.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, that was an awesome interview. I hope you got some takeaways from it. And please take a look at his book. You can find that on Amazon. And for complete show notes, head on over to highenergygirl.com/show. And his website is drmarcmilstein.com. That's drmarcmilstein.com. Go out and make it a great day. This podcast contains the opinion and thoughts of its host and guests. It is intended to provide helpful and informative material on the subjects covered. All statements made on the podcast have not been evaluated by the FDA and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. If the listener requires professional assistance or advice, please contact your personal medical doctor. Both host and guest specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence directly or indirectly of the use and application of any of the contents of these episodes. Like I said, this is my opinion and I could be wrong.